Ancient explorers crossed entire oceans without modern tools. They relied on something else. It was a navigation system hidden in their travel stories. Mythology wasn't fiction. It was a lost technology for mapping the world. Star myths were celestial charts. Tales of monsters marked dangerous terrain. Epic poems preserved survival data. They passed it down for generations. Our ancestors knew things about the land and sea, things we've forgotten. It was a system of memory, not maps. The human voice was the original storage. Every epic poem, every story told by a fire, that was a file full of necessary information. Oral tradition was a living database. Updated and refined each time it was told. It wasn't for entertainment. The rhythm of a story, the predictable structure of a hero's path, those were memory tricks. Devices to lock essential data into a community's mind. The data was everything you needed to survive. A story might describe a hero walking past a crooked oak tree. Then a spring of sweet water, then a valley where the deer gather in autumn. If you listen, you're not just hearing an adventure, you're getting a weather report. A hunting guide, a topographic map, all woven into a single narrative. The repetition mattered. Each telling reinforced the crucial details. Generations later, a traveler could recite the same verses. And in a vast, unfamiliar forest, they could find that same spring. The landscape and the legend became the same thing. The deepest example might be the Australian Aboriginal songlines. For generations, these intricate song cycles describe the creation of the land itself. Every hill, every river bend, every waterhole is in the melody and the lyrics. To navigate hundreds of miles of desert, you didn't check a parchment, you recalled the song. The journey was a performance. Each step was a note in a living map. A map sung into existence by ancestors. It shows something. The world's first GPS wasn't a satellite signal. It was a story, preserved in the breath and memory of a people. A technology of sound and meaning. So if stories could encode the physical world, then what else was hidden in the myths we call fantasy? What other survival manuals were in there? The sky was the first map. The stars were the most reliable guide, but people didn't just look up, they listened, they told stories, and they turned the cosmos into a language. Celestial mythology wasn't just fanciful tales, it was a star chart written in narrative. Constellations became characters, their movements became plots. It was a memory system. It's one thing to memorize a star cluster rising in the east at a certain time. It's another to remember the story of Orion, forever chasing the seven sisters, the Pleiades, across the night. That story locks the relationship in place. It encodes data. When Orion's belt appears at dusk, it might signal planting season. When the Pleiades vanish, it could warn of coming storms. A time no sailor would set out. The myth carries the instruction manual. This was a global technology. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open water. Guided by stars, waves, wind, their star compass was a mental map of the sky divided into houses, but this technical knowledge was woven into stories. The demigod Maui fishing up islands wasn't just a creation myth. It was a way to remember navigational paths, the characteristics of new lands. The goddess Hina's journey to the moon held clues about lunar phases. The tides, in Maori tradition, the star cluster Matariki, the Pleiades reappearing before sunrise signaled the new year, a time for remembrance, gathering. And practically for harvesting, the story gave the event meaning, made the observation unforgettable for the whole community. By personifying the stars, giving them desires and families, our ancestors did something. They took the silent vastness of the universe and made it familiar, turned the cosmos into a neighborhood, old friends whose positions told you where you were. When you needed to act, it was a global positioning system written in legend, a celestial roadmap, and if the stars provided longitude, then the monsters of the deep would provide the latitude. The sea had its own language, and the old epics, they were like a phrasebook for it. Out in the open ocean with no landmarks, your survival came down to reading the water. The waves, the color, the way the birds behaved, those were the only signs you had, and the great sea stories, they took those signs and wove them into the narrative. They turned this chaotic expanse into something you could read. Take Homer's Wine Dark Sea. That wasn't just a poetic line, that deep purple color, it could mean great depth. Or a certain plankton bloom, which meant specific fishing grounds or a particular current. It was a piece of data, right there in the rhythm of the tale. The epic journey was a training run. Look at the challenges Odysseus faces. He's not just fighting monsters, he's navigating real, dangerous sea conditions. Charybdis, that whirlpool, it might be a legendary version of a real tidal race, a known, treacherous current, and the warning to avoid it, the story of the sacrifice needed to get past, that embeds a navigational rule into something terrifying. You wouldn't forget where Charybdis was. The Viking sagas work the same way. They're meticulous. They describe coastlines, fjord entrances, sailing times. They don't just say a journey was long. They might say it took as long as the sun is highest in summer, tying the voyage to a seasonal, celestial marker. That was practical data disguised as a saga. But this idea finds its fullest expression with the Polynesian navigators. Their oral traditions, the chants for each voyage, they were environmental manuals. A chant might describe how the long ocean swells from distant storms would bend around an unseen island. A navigator, lying in his canoe hull, could feel that change in the swell pattern. The chant told him what to feel for. Their stories, like Maui fishing up islands or slowing the sun, they're creation myths, but they hold layers of practical observation. Slowing the sun could be a metaphor for understanding its changing arc across the seasons, which was key for estimating your east-west position. These stories preserved a whole science. Wave piloting, star paths, bird migration. It's what allowed the settlement of the entire Pacific. The epic was the curriculum. Each telling was a rehearsal. So the master navigator's knowledge, his way of reading the ocean's whispers, could outlive him. So if the sea's patterns were captured in song, then what about the dangers on the land itself? Where would that information be kept? Maybe in the most memorable parts of all, the tales of the monsters that guarded the way. The monsters were never just monsters. They were landmarks, they had teeth. In a world without signs, without warnings, the best way to mark a dangerous place was to give it a story so chilling you wouldn't forget. The dragon wasn't just guarding a cave, it was guarding a fissure, a crack in the earth that breathed bad air where the ground could give way. The story of the fire-breathing beast meant children, travelers, they'd stay away from that hill. It was a hazard symbol, woven from myth. Fresh water was the prize, the ultimate prize in any ancient landscape, so stories placed guardians there too. The naiads of Greek myth, the spirits of springs, they weren't just decoration. By making a water source sacred, by giving it a protector, the community encoded a rule. This place is vital, keep it clean, respect it. The story enforced conservation. It turned a practical need into a sacred law. The deeper examples are in the epic dangers. The sea, look at the world serpent from Norse myth, Jörmungandr. It's said to circle the entire world, biting its own tail. That's not just an image of chaos. It's a metaphor for the dangerous, encircling currents of the North Atlantic. That relentless force that could trap a Viking ship, drag it under. The story gives that force a shape. A name, it makes the hazard comprehensible. Then the Sirens, their song luring sailors to crash on the rocks. It's more than a tale about temptation. It's a navigation warning. It describes a real thing, an acoustic phenomenon. Near certain rocky coasts, the wind makes sounds, strange sounds, whistles, hums, songs from nowhere. A tired sailor, disoriented, might steer toward that sound and find hidden reefs, a fatal shore. The myth personifies it, turns a sensory trick into a character with a motive. You don't just avoid rocks, you avoid the sirens. The lesson sticks. That was the genius, a dry fact. There's a methane vent here, could be forgotten. But the tale of the sleeping giant whose breath kills, that survives centuries. By weaving the hazard into a narrative with agency and emotion, our ancestors built a safety database. A community database. Every strange creature in the forest, every spirit in the lake was a data point, a living entry in a mental map that said, "Here there be dragons," and meant it. This map wasn't on parchment. It was etched into the stories a culture told about itself. And if the landscape was a story, then the journey across it that had to be more. It had to be the code that unlocked the map. The hero's journey is a kind of map for the mind, an ancient traveler leaving home. They weren't just walking into a physical wilderness. They were entering a psychological one. The fear could be as paralyzing as any desert. But what if the journey had a script, a pattern, something predictable that told you what came next? That's the fourth principle. The old stories, from Gilgamesh to Odysseus, they all follow a similar path. A hero hears a call, leaves home, meets a mentor, faces trials, gets something, and returns changed. Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth, but for people back then, it was more than a story. It was a navigation system for the human spirit. It gave a mental framework. It made exploration feel familiar, almost inevitable. Each story stage matched a phase of a real journey, the call to adventure. That could be a trade chance or a drought, a need for new land. Then the refusal, the natural fear, the hesitation, and then crossing that first threshold, leaving your known world behind. This narrative prepared you. Psychologically, it normalized the fear. It said this doubt is part of it, keep going. Then come the trials. In a story, monsters and magic. On the ground, real obstacles. A mountain pass became a giant's lair. A rushing river became a test from a god. The narrative gave a shape to the hardship. It wasn't random suffering. It was a challenge to be overcome, like in the tales told by the fire. The helper figure is especially telling. In stories, a wise wizard. On a real journey, it was local knowledge. The stranger in a village who showed a safer path. The different tribe that taught you about plants. Getting that crucial information was in the story's frame, receiving aid from a supernatural source. It framed cooperation as a heroic milestone, not weakness, the ultimate goal, the boon. It's revealing. It wasn't always gold, often it was knowledge. A new route, the location of fresh water, a trade agreement. The hero returns with this prize, transforming their home. This narrative algorithm did something. It standardized exploration. It made the unknown feel like a story with a known ending. That was vital for morale. When you're exhausted and lost, you could think, this is just the ordeal. The helper will come, the return is ahead. It gave a psychological compass. It kept you moving. The journey was no longer a chaotic gamble. It was a myth playing out in real time. With you as the hero, and this wasn't abstract, we can see its footprints in specific journeys across the world. The Odyssey wasn't just a poem, it was a handbook. A pilot's guide for an entire sea. You could think of it as a database, an ancient maritime database. Every stop in that long journey home, all those tortuous episodes, they weren't just fantasy. They were data points, landmarks on a shared mental map of the Mediterranean. For a culture starting to stretch across that sea, this epic was a warning. And it was a promise. Take the Lotus Eaters, that land where the fruit makes men forget home. It's often a moral tale about temptation, but on a practical level, it's a coded warning. Maybe about a real coastal region with a narcotic plant, or a trading post where sailors lingered and lost their purpose. The story marks it. This is a psychological hazard zone. Keep your crew focused, move on. Then you have the twin terrors, Scylla and Charybdis, the six-headed monster and the deadly whirlpool. They're not random. They're a dramatic personification of a real, narrow strait, the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily. The waters are turbulent, conflicting currents, sudden whirlpools. Scylla, the cliff-dwelling beast, could be the jagged rocks on one side. Charybdis, the sucking whirlpool, the violent eddies on the other. The poem's lesson is explicit. You must sail between them, accept a lesser loss to avoid total destruction. For a captain, the message was clear. This passage is dangerous, stay to the center. Be prepared for sacrifice. Even the helpful stops hold coded data. Aeolia, the floating island of the wind god Aeolus. He gives Odysseus a bag containing all the contrary winds tied shut, leaving only a favorable breeze to guide him home. This could be a lesson on wind patterns, a region maybe in the western Mediterranean where the winds shift predictably. Knowing when to sail and when to wait for the right seasonal breeze, that was everything. The difference between a swift voyage and being blown back to where you started. The story encodes a principle, patience and timing, and Calypso's island, Ogygia. A place of beauty and captivity far from any known world. Scholars debate if it's a real remote island like Malta or Gozo, but its function might be more profound. It represents the ultimate test of isolation, the point of no return psychologically, the place where a sailor could lose his identity, his mission. His desire to ever go home. It marks the edge of the known world, not just geographically but mentally. The story says, beyond here, you risk losing yourself. So by studying these episodes, an ancient Greek could build a cognitive chart, a progression of hazards, resources, cultural encounters that ringed their sea. The epic provided a shared vocabulary for the perils and possibilities of exploration. It turned chaotic, open water into a story with a known sequence. You could almost hear an experienced sailor advising a younger one, describing a coast not by coordinates but by its story. Beware the Sirens coast near here. Look for the sheltered bay where the Phaeacians might welcome you. This wasn't just literature, it was the operating system for maritime trade, for colonization, for the very idea of a connected Greek world. The poem was the map, and every listener was learning to read it. But this technique, weaving waypoints into legend, it wasn't unique to the Greeks. Far to the north, an entirely different people were using sagas to navigate a world of ice and fire. The Greeks were working their inland sea, but another culture was out on the open ocean. The Polynesian expansion across the Pacific, that might be the peak of human wayfinding. Sailing across thousands of miles of empty sea, finding specks of land with just memory and observation. And at the center of that knowledge was a figure, the demigod Maui. His stories weren't just for telling, they were the core curriculum. There's the famous one, Maui fishing up islands from the deep. He uses his grandmother's jawbone as a fishhook, catches a great fish, hauls it up, and it becomes the North Island of New Zealand. On one level, it's a story about how a place came to be, but for a navigator, it was a layered lesson. The fishing was a direct metaphor for the crucial skill, land finding. How you spot an island you can't see yet. You read the signs, the story encodes them. A stationary cloud formation on the horizon, maybe green tinged from lagoon light, that could be the fish just below the surface. The flight patterns of certain seabirds going out to fish and returning to land, those became the ripples leading to the catch. Even the long ocean swells bending around unseen land, that was the tug on the line. Maui's fishing story packaged that whole observational science into one image. It turned technique into legend. Then there's the story of Maui slowing the sun. He braids ropes, snares the sun god, forces it to travel slower to give people longer days. That's a profound astronomical metaphor. For a Polynesian wayfinder, the sun was a primary directional guide. Its rising and setting points shift with the seasons. To navigate east or west across vast distances, you had to understand that solar arc, its changes through the year. Slowing the sun, in a practical sense, meant learning to mentally compensate for its movement, to use its position with such precision you could make the day last long enough to reach your target. The myth dramatizes that intellectual mastery using a moving celestial body as a fixed guide. The navigators themselves, the wayfinders, were living libraries. They didn't memorize one story but hundreds, chants for specific star paths over particular islands, songs describing the feel of different ocean currents against the hull, rhythms matching wave patterns from distant storms. The Maui cycles were a central pillar in that system. Everything was connected. A star chant would reference a wind pattern, which would recall a piece of a Maui adventure, which would hint at a type of cloud to watch for. This knowledge was so integrated the lines between myth, astronomy, and environmental science didn't exist. They were the same thing. A wayfinder didn't consult a story, then check the stars, then look at the water. He experienced a unified reality where the chant, the star, and the swell were all expressions of the same navigational truth. This wasn't accidental exploration. It was intentional, repeatable voyage. They weren't just blown by the wind hoping for the best. They were executing a planned course across a mental map that was sung into existence by their ancestors. The story of Maui wasn't about a magical past, it was a continuous, active tool for shaping the future. It provided the framework that made the impossible journey feel knowable, even destined. The myth was the map, the compass, and the captain's log, all woven into the identity of the people. So if mythology could guide you across an ocean, what was its role when you finally reached a new shore, a place no one from your world had ever seen? The story had to perform one final, critical function. It had to build a world from nothing. The map had to be shared across deserts, across mountains, across languages. The great trade networks, the Silk Road, they weren't just moving silk or spices. They were moving stories, and those stories became landmarks, common landmarks for a whole continent. A merchant from Venice meets a caravan master from Samarkand. They don't share a language, but they might share a myth, a story that had traveled the same paths as the goods. This was the diffusion of narrative landmarks. It created a shared mental geography, a kind of mythological lingua franca. Anyone could understand it. Take Grendel, the monster from Beowulf. Its roots are in northern Europe, but scholars see echoes, the tale of a creature haunting a hall coming from a misty fen. That might have started earlier as a traveler's account, a story carried from the frontier zones of Central Asia, a description of real conflict with isolated tribes. Or maybe the psychological dread of the open steppe that transformed over centuries, over miles, into a supernatural beast. The story moved west with traders. It changed shape, adapted to new landscapes until it settled in Scandinavia as Grendel. The hazard it described, the danger in the lonely, marshy places, that was universal. So the story became a portable warning, and the flow went both ways. From the east came tales of mystical mountains touching heaven, of blessed oases where the water granted vigor. These weren't just fantasies, they were often based on real places, a high mountain pass with a stunning view, a rare desert spring with mineral-rich, healing waters. As these accounts traveled west, they solidified. They became waypoints, motivational landmarks. The most famous example might be the Fountain of Youth. A legend that obsessed explorers. Its origin probably wasn't in a Spanish court. It was on the trade routes themselves, rumors of hot springs with therapeutic properties. Stories of a rare, reliable freshwater source in a brutal desert. For a parched caravan, finding such a spot felt like discovering immortality. The the story of its power would race down the Silk Road ahead of the actual geography. It became a goal, a symbol of salvation. It didn't matter if it was literally true. It functioned as a target, a shared destination everyone had heard of. This is how the mythological map was built collectively. A merchant giving directions wouldn't use local names. He would use the circulating stories. Head east for 10 days until you see the mountain that looks like a sleeping dragon. Then turn north toward the valley they say is guarded by stone giants. Past the salt flats where ghosts are said to walk, you'll find the well with sweet water. Every instruction was a piece of a legend that created a common set of symbols. A sleeping dragon mountain meant a specific, memorable silhouette. A valley of stone giants meant a pass full of strange, eroded rock formations. These were descriptions that transcended language. They created a shared expectation. If you heard the story of the Dragon Mountain from a trader in Baghdad, and then weeks later on the Tibetan plateau you saw that peak, you knew you were on the right path. The story had verified your location. The Silk Road, then, was more than a physical network. It was a narrative nervous system. Pulses of information, wrapped in myth, traveled along it. Guiding, warning, motivating. A story about a monster here, a healing spring there. It wove the disparate cultures of Eurasia into a single, story-mapped landscape. The traveler was never truly in unknown territory. They were walking through a world their stories had already described, and this points to the final function. The most powerful one, these ancient systems didn't just guide the body, they sustained the mind. The map wasn't just spoken, it wasn't just sung, it was danced. The story could leave the mind and enter the body. A whole community could become a living atlas. That's the final principle, navigation as a physical ritual. A kinetic memory. For many cultures, the journey wasn't simply recalled. It was performed. Ceremonial dances were embodied maps. Each step, each turn, each gesture was a piece of geographic data. A leap could represent crossing a canyon. A series of shuffling steps could trace the path of a river. A stomp might mark arrival at a sacred mountain. This wasn't abstract art, it was practical education. The young learned their history and their territories lay out not from a scroll but by moving. Muscle memory became map memory. You didn't just know the story of the Great Migration, you could dance it. Your body knew the sequence of the land. We see this in the ceremonial dances of many Native American tribes. Certain dances are explicit reenactments, epic journeys across the continent. The patterns of the dancers, moving in lines and circles, replicate the migration route itself. Specific movements correspond to real obstacles. A high, reaching step might signify climbing a steep pass. A low, swaying motion could represent fording a wide river. The rhythm of the drums might mimic the heartbeat of the journey, the pace of travel across different terrains. Through this, the landscape was internalized by each new generation. The dance was a living, breathing cartography. It ensured the path home was never forgotten. It was stored in the sinew and bone of the people. Across the ocean, in the Pacific, there's another example. The Hawaiian hula. To many outsiders, it's a beautiful dance, but in its traditional form, it is a narrative art. An oli, a chant, tells a story, and the hula gives that story physical form. For stories of voyaging, the dancer's hands become the entire seascape, fingers fluttering like rain, arms sweeping in arcs like rolling swells, hands pushing forward in the precise motion of paddling a canoe. The dancer's torso might lean and sway, becoming the hull itself, riding the ocean's rhythm. The footwork, the kahalo step, can represent the long, steady journey across open water. Through this performance, the knowledge of how to read the sea, how to navigate from one island to another, was passed down. It was a training manual in motion. Even if the specific words of an ancient chant were lost over time, the movement vocabulary preserved the essential feel of the voyage, the shape of a wave. The pull of a paddle, it kept the connection to the ocean alive in the community's muscle and memory. This is the ultimate layer. It moves beyond the mind and into the body itself. The ritual dance transforms abstract directions into instinct. It turns geography into grace. The community doesn't just hold the map, they are the map. Every performance is a rehearsal for a real journey and a remembrance of an ancestral one. The path is remembered not only in stories told around a fire, but in the fire of movement itself. In the shared breath and synchronized steps of the people, this was how the world was truly known, not just as a picture to look at, but as a journey to be lived from the inside out. The map's finest details weren't in the sky, they were in the world itself, in signs we don't really see anymore. The old stories are full of them, a whole language of cues from the land. They taught you to read the landscape with everything you had, to hear the map, to smell it, to feel it change. It was a complete awareness, where every animal, every scent, every sound carried a piece of where you were. Take animals, the stories are full of them, not just as decoration, as guides, a tale about following a white stag to safety. That's not just magic, it's a practical truth. Deer make trails through thick forest, and those trails, worn over generations, often lead to what matters most, water. The story makes that fact stick. It turns an observation into a rule you remember. Bird behavior was another signal, the direction of certain flocks at dusk where specific seabirds nested. These were long-distance signs, a Polynesian chant that mentions the white turn the monu oku. That's not just describing a bird, it's pointing toward land. That bird fishes near shore and flies back to its island every night. Spot it at sea, and you know an island lies in the direction it's flying. The story preserves that link. It makes the bird a character in the journey's success. Then there are the quieter senses, like smell. How many old tales describe a scent on the wind long before land appears? The smell of pine from a hidden shore, damp earth from a valley, distant wood smoke. These weren't just poetry, they were vital information. In a time before engines, the air was clean information. A traveler hearing a story about a hero smelling salt and cedar from a far coast learned to pay attention to the wind, to tell one scent from another. That smell of wet limestone might mean a cave, and so shelter or water. The story trained you to use your nose as a compass. Sound was another layer. Myths have talking spirits in caves, echoes that give advice, drums heard from beyond the hills. These stories give a voice to acoustic things. An echo in a deep valley wasn't just a rebound. In a story, it became an ancestor's voice. A mountain spirit, but practically, that story taught a skill, echolocation. By shouting and listening for the return, you could measure a canyon's width, a cave's depth, a cliff's nearness in thick fog. A tale about singing stones might mean a rock formation where the wind makes a constant hum, an auditory beacon in empty terrain. Even insects held clues. The gathering patterns of certain flies or mosquitoes often point to standing water. A story warning of spirits that swarm like mist near a swamp might be encoding a real danger. Malaria carrying insects, the narrative makes you wary of that place. It turns an entomological fact into a hazard you remember. That's the depth of these systems. They didn't just say go north, they taught you to listen to the north, to smell the river valley before you saw it, to watch what the crows were doing. They cultivated a state of hyper-awareness, where the traveler was in constant, subtle dialogue with everything around them. The whole natural world became a readable text. Every rustle, every shift in the wind's scent, every animal call, each was a potential sentence in the story of where you were and what was ahead. The myth was the teacher, training generations to see a world alive with meaning, to navigate not just by looking at the horizon, but by being present inside the living map all around them. The stories became solid. They were built right into the ground. The most powerful myths, they weren't just in the air, in the telling. They were etched into stone, carved into the horizon itself. ancient architects, they turned the narrative map into a physical one. They built permanent landmarks, and these landmarks locked celestial knowledge into place, sacred geography. These structures were the ultimate anchors for the whole mythological coordinate system. A story could be forgotten, but a mountain of stone aligned to the sun's path that would keep its truth. For millennia, take Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain, those massive stones in that circle. It's a textbook example, but it wasn't just a temple, it was a colossal calendar. A mythic timekeeper rendered in granite, the central axis aligns precisely with the summer solstice sunrise. When dawn breaks on the longest day, the sun's rays shoot right through the heart of the monument. That alignment wasn't an accident, it was the culmination, a deep, story-driven understanding of the cosmos. The solstice wasn't just a day, it was a pivotal event. In the yearly myth of the sun's journey, its weakening and strengthening, its death and rebirth, by marking it in stone, the builders turned an abstract event into a physical, communal experience. You could stand in the center and witness the story happening. The myth became a predictable fact, observable. The structure itself was the mnemonic device. It didn't need words, its form held the data. This principle repeats across the ancient world. In Egypt, the grand temples were not just houses for gods. They were cosmic diagrams in sandstone. Their layout often mirrored the journey, the mythic journey of the sun god Ra across the sky, a worshipper moving through the temple from the bright courtyard into the darker, enclosed inner sanctuaries. They were reenacting the sun's passage from dawn to dusk, from life into the underworld and back. The path of ritual was the path of the myth. It was a walkable story. Every column, every statue's placement, it reinforced a cosmic order, and that order was also a narrative. The temple anchored that story to a point on the Nile. A fixed node in a vast network of sacred geography that mapped the heavens onto the earth. Perhaps the most dramatic illustration comes from Mesoamerica. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid El Castillo, it's a masterpiece of this encoded alignment, a physical manifestation of the myth of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. The pyramid's design is so precise that during the equinoxes, spring and autumn, a stunning effect occurs. As the sun sets, the stepped corners cast a series of triangular shadows. Down the northern staircase, these shadows connect with stone serpent heads at the base. The result is the undulating body of a giant serpent, appearing to slither down the side of the pyramid. It is the myth made visible, and it happens like clockwork twice a year. This was far more than a spectacle. It was a functional agricultural calendar. Carved into the landscape, the equinox, the moment of balance between day and night, was a critical marker for planting cycles in that region. The appearance of the shadow serpent was a public signal. Undeniable, it told an entire civilization without a single spoken word that the time had arrived, the time for a key seasonal activity. The story of Kukulkan was not separate from the science of survival. They were the same knowledge expressed in architecture. The pyramid was an observatory, a calendar, and a sacred text, all built into one. These sites were the hard drives of the ancient world. They stored the core data, a culture's relationship with the cosmos and the land. They were permanent, large-scale mnemonic devices that could not be lost to fire or faded memory. By aligning a temple to a solstice sunrise, or designing a pyramid to cast a serpent shadow, our ancestors did something profound. They pinned their most important stories to specific coordinates on the earth and in the sky. They created a fixed, reliable network of mythological landmarks. You could navigate by them, tell time by them, and understand your place in the universe by simply standing in their shadow. The map was no longer just in the mind or the dance, it was the ground you walked on, waiting to tell its story with every turn of the planet. A map can fade over time, the lines blur, even the clearest story can drift from what it was meant to do. Those systems that held knowledge so well, they had a vulnerability, the slow erosion of meaning. As generations passed, as people moved, as empires changed, something happened. The environmental context, the thing that gave the story its practical use, it could just vanish. What's left is the shell, the fantastical shell with the navigational code stripped away. That's the distortion, when myth stops revealing the world and starts to obscure it. A tale about a fiery chariot in the sky might have been an account. A description, a comet with a burning tail, or ball lightning. For the people who first told it, it was a record, something they actually saw, a celestial marker. It had meaning for timing, for omens, but take that story, move it inland over mountains, tell it for 500 years somewhere comets aren't seen. The memory of the original sighting fades. What's left is the image, the chariot, the fire. It transforms. It becomes a story about a god's anger, a hero's ascent. The practical anchor is gone, only the awe remains. Scholars have a name for this, mythological drift. It's the natural transformation. A functional narrative becomes a symbolic one, a religious one. The landscape changes, the climate shifts, the bird that was a key marker goes extinct. A spring dries up, but the story about the spirit there, it continues. It adapts, it attaches to a new hill, a new tree. Its original warning, its instruction, avoid this vent, find water here, that becomes detached, it floats free. Becomes a general tale of caution or a blessing, so we have to be careful. Not every monster in a legend matches a geographic hazard. Not every magical fruit points to a real plant. Over centuries, artistic embellishment takes over. Storytellers add drama, romance, moral lessons. A simple waypoint story about a narrow pass gets a dragon to make it memorable for children. A historical conflict with a neighboring tribe becomes, over generations, an epic battle against giants. The navigational core gets wrapped in layers of cultural addition. Like a seed inside a beautiful, intricate shell, that's the challenge now for researchers. How do you peel back those layers? How do you separate the ancient signal from the noise? The timeless noise of human creativity. The work is delicate. It requires looking for patterns, not in one story, but across many versions from different regions. It means cross-referencing myths with archaeology, with pollen records that show ancient plants, with geological surveys of landmarks. The goal is to find the stubborn details. The ones that don't change much from telling to telling, even when the characters and morals do. Take flood myths. They exist everywhere. The specifics, the hero, the god, the reason, they vary wildly. That's the cultural layer, but the core detail, a great deluge covering the land, that's persistent, remarkably so, that has led researchers to ask if it's a memory. A collective memory of real events, post-ice age sea level rise or catastrophic local floods. The fantastical ark, the boat, that's the shell. The memory of catastrophic water, that's the possible kernel. The geographical truth, understanding this drift, it doesn't diminish the myths, it deepens respect for them. It shows they were living things, they evolved. They served one purpose for a seafaring people and another purpose for their inland descendants. The story survived because it was useful, even if its use changed. From a sailing manual to a sacred parable, its longevity is a testament to its power, not a mark of falsehood. The key is to listen differently, to hear not just the thunder of the gods, but maybe the distant echo. The echo of a real thunderstorm that once guided a ship to shore. The map is still there, but sometimes you have to listen. Listen for the oldest whispers beneath the song. The old stories are whispers now, but we're learning to hear them. It's not something one person can do. It's a collective effort, a kind of modern wayfinding. It brings together fields that don't usually talk. To decode these ancient systems, you need a new toolkit, one that blends archaeology and anthropology, astronomy and ecology, linguistics and the study of plants. This approach lets you cross-reference the myth with the physical world it describes. You can move from the symbolic story back toward the original map. Take the sky. Archaeoastronomy uses software to roll back the clock on the night sky. You can calculate where the stars were, the planets, the constellations, as they appeared 3,000 years ago, even 5,000. Then you look at a myth. It describes a god descending on a certain date, or a hero's birth marked by a bright star. By aligning the story with the reconstructed heavens, you can test an idea. Was this encoding an actual event, a supernova, a planetary conjunction, the rising of a specific star that meant the rainy season was starting? It turns mythology into a form of historical astronomy, a record of what our ancestors saw and what they needed to remember. On the ground, the work is meticulous. Philologists, scholars of ancient language, they dissect the words. They trace place names back through time, peeling away layers of translation. A name that now means field of the gods might have originally meant place of the bitter water. In a lost tongue, that single clue can redirect an entire search, pointing archaeologists toward a specific spring or a salt flat. The story's shell remains, but the decoded name reveals the geographical truth inside it. Then there are the botanists, the ecologists. So many myths speak of magical herbs, healing roots, deadly poisons. Ethnobotanists compare these descriptions with the actual flora of a region. The mythical Maui herb that protected Odysseus. Scholars think it could be based on a real plant, one with hallucinogenic or medicinal properties native to the Mediterranean. Identifying the plant changes the context. It wasn't just magic, it was a coded reference to local knowledge, a survival tip about which plants could counteract toxins or induce visions for a ritual. Perhaps one of the most elegant tools is Palynology, the study of ancient pollen. Pollen grains are incredibly durable. They preserve for millennia in sediment layers. A team can take a core sample from the bottom of a lake mentioned in an epic poem. By analyzing the fossilized pollen there, they can reconstruct the exact environment of that place 2,000 years ago. Was it a dense forest, an open grassland, a cultivated field? This data creates a snapshot. It tells us if the story's dark, impenetrable wood was poetic license or ecological fact. It grounds the narrative in a verifiable reality. This is the modern quest, not to disprove the myths, but to listen to them with every tool we have. We're learning to read them in stereo, hearing the cultural meaning with one ear and the environmental data with the other. By stitching together evidence from the soil, the stars, and the syllables of ancient words, we begin to reverse engineer an intelligence. We start to see the stories not as primitive fantasies, but as sophisticated, multi-layered databases built from a lifetime of sharp observation and crafted to endure long after the last map had faded. The human mind is built for stories. We know this from cognitive science. A list of coordinates fades, but an epic poem lasts for thousands of years. It's the wiring of the brain. We don't remember isolated facts, we remember stories. That's the story superiority effect. A dry instruction is fragile. Sail east for 3 days until you see a lone rock. Forget one detail and the data is useless, but put that instruction inside a narrative. A hero sails east for 3 days. He braves a storm sent by an angry sea god. He finds a sacred rock where a spirit grants him safe passage. Then multiple regions of the brain light up. The sequence activates our sense of time and order. The emotional stakes create a memory anchor, the fear of the storm, the relief of finding the rock. The vivid imagery engages the visual cortex. The cause and effect logic of the quest satisfies our need for pattern. All this combines, the information becomes robust, interconnected, nearly impossible to forget. That hero's journey wasn't just a plot, it was a perfect mnemonic architecture. A data storage system optimized for human hardware. The navigation queue was embedded in a drama, the practical detail became inseparable from the survival of the character. You weren't memorizing a direction, you were remembering a fate, so the core routes, the critical hazards, they survived, not as footnotes in a logbook, but as the climaxes of beloved tales told for generations. The narrative preserved data, but it also made complex phenomena comprehensible. This is where metaphor and analogy become genius tools. Describing a treacherous ocean current as a coiling world serpent, that isn't just poetic, it's cognitively efficient. The serpent provides an intuitive mental model. A sinuous, powerful, encircling body for a force that is otherwise invisible and abstract. A sailor doesn't need fluid dynamics. He needs to understand a grasping, living danger in that part of the sea. Something that can trap his ship. The metaphor translates a complex environmental pattern into a simple, powerful image. It conveys the nature of the hazard and the appropriate emotional response: caution, respect, fear. This narrative encoding created knowledge systems. They were error-resistant, adaptable. The core utility was locked inside a compelling story frame. It could be elaborated upon, embellished with local details, connected to new myths without losing its essential function. Each storyteller could add their own flair, their own cultural layer, but the central waypoint remained intact: the serpent's domain, the Sirens' coast. The healing spring, the story was a living file. It could be updated without corrupting the original data, a technology that improved with retelling. So these myths weren't primitive guesses, they were sophisticated cognitive technology. They leveraged the strengths of human memory and understanding to turn survival information into a shared legacy, inheritable, unforgettable. The epic was the ultimate backup drive, carried in the mind of every member of a community, ready to be activated the moment a new journey began. Pinpoint accuracy has a cost. Our GPS is a marvel. It guides us anywhere, a confidence our ancestors never had. But this convenience has rewired how we relate to the world. We follow a glowing line on a screen. That line demands nothing from us. We don't need to check the sun's angle to guess the time. We don't need to read the clouds. The color of the soil means nothing to our route. The journey becomes a passive transaction, a destination delivered. The landscape just blurs outside the window. We gain efficiency, we gain safety, freedom from uncertainty, but we risk a kind of environmental amnesia. We forget how to listen. Ancient wayfinding was the opposite of passive. It was a full sensory dialogue, continuous. A navigator wasn't just moving from A to B. They were in a constant state of interpretation, reading the wind's touch, the star's slow wheel, the specific cry of a bird. This required deep literacy. A literacy of place. You had to know which trees grew near freshwater. You had to understand how dawn mist behaved over a swamp versus a meadow. The journey was a test of attention. And in passing that test, you became woven into the land. You weren't just passing through, you were participating. The story map didn't just tell you where to go. It told you what it meant to be there, so that's the trade-off. The old systems fostered integration. Humans saw themselves as participants within a living, communicative landscape. A mountain wasn't just an obstacle, it had a story, a spirit, a role in the grand narrative. Your safe passage depended on respecting that role. Modern navigation, for all its power, often promotes consumption. The landscape becomes a resource to be traversed, a set of coordinates to be consumed. The connection is transactional, not relational. The loss is more than the skill of celestial navigation. It's the quieting of a conversation that lasted for millennia. We no longer need to ask the land for directions, so we've forgotten how it speaks. This doesn't mean we abandon our devices. The safety they provide is a genuine gift, but it invites a question. What might we reclaim? Maybe it's the simple act of looking up. Noticing which way the moss grows on the trees, learning the name of one local bird and what its behavior signifies. It's about re-engaging our senses on a journey, even with the phone in our pocket. Using the tool but not being used by it, we can choose to be passengers on the glowing line, or we can choose sometimes to become wayfinders again. To listen for the older maps, the ones that still whisper beneath the pavement and the pixels. The conversation isn't over, it's being relearned, one wave, one star at a time. There's a revival happening, quiet but powerful. People are returning to these ancient paths, not as historians, as navigators, and they're proving these systems aren't museum pieces. They're living technologies for a sustainable mind. One of the most profound examples started in the Pacific. In the 1970s, a group came together with a radical idea. To build a traditional Polynesian voyaging canoe, a wā, using only the materials, the designs their ancestors would have known. They called it Hula. Star of Gladness, its mission was audacious, to sail across thousands of miles of open ocean without a single modern instrument, no compass, no sextant. Certainly no GPS, the only guidance would come from a master navigator, a PWO, using the stars, the swells, the winds, the flight of birds. That knowledge had nearly vanished. Only a handful of elders in Micronesia still held the full art. The first voyages were a reawakening. When Hokula sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976, using only these methods, it was more than a nautical feat. It was a cultural resurrection. It proved the epic migrations in the Chants weren't luck, they weren't legend, they were repeatable science. The canoe became a floating classroom. A new generation learned to feel the ocean, to memorize the star compass, to sit in the hull and sense the subtle bend of a swell around an unseen island. Hokula has since sailed around the globe. Its message is one of stewardship, planetary unity, but this revival is about more than sailing. It's about restoring a relationship. A way of knowing that sees the environment not as a backdrop but as a teacher. It fosters a deep, non-verbal literacy of the world. A similar reconnection is happening on land. In Scandinavia, courses now teach forest navigation, wilderness orientation. Students learn to move through dense woods without a map or a device. They're taught to read the landscape as a story. The way lichen grows on the north side of trees, how ant hills align with the sun's warmth, the meaning behind the old names for hills and streams, names that often hold clues about the terrain. Instructors might share a snippet of a saga, a description of a journey, and then challenge participants to find the real-world features it describes. Is that oddly shaped rock the troll's seat from the tale? Does this winding creek match the serpent's path from the old song? These aren't games. They're exercises in re-engaging a cognitive muscle, the muscle that turns observation into understanding. These movements share a common thread. They're active efforts to preserve intangible cultural heritage. But they are also urgent responses to a modern condition, a condition of disconnection. In an age of digital distraction, climate uncertainty, the skills in these old ways are suddenly relevant. Profoundly relevant, they teach patience. You cannot rush a star to its zenith. They teach humility. The weather does not care for your schedule. Most of all, they teach acute, participatory observation. To notice the small signs, the shift in wind that means a storm is still hours away, the specific bird song that indicates a water source is near. This is ecological mindfulness in its purest form. A constant, respectful dialogue with your surroundings. The revival proves a point, a vital point. These systems aren't obsolete. They're a different kind of viable. A sustainable technology for the human spirit. They offer a compass for a world that often feels spiritually adrift. They remind us the oldest map might still be the most reliable one. It's written in the world itself, waiting for anyone willing to learn its language. These old systems, they aren't just history, they're blueprints for a different way to learn. To make knowledge stick by putting it inside a story. Right now, we teach things in separate boxes, science in one, history in another, literature somewhere else. But you could teach geography through a local legend, say a river spirit, then the water's path, the seasonal floods, the life along the banks. It all fits into a living story. Students aren't just collecting facts, they're following a character's path. They're figuring out why the river turns here, or what an old tale about a talking fish really means, maybe about spawning seasons. It makes the subject personal, it sticks, and it closes that gap between STEM and the humanities, because a story isn't the opposite of data, it's a tool. A powerful one for organizing complicated information about the world. You can use this directly. Think about a hiking trail. Instead of normal signs, you have markers that tell one continuous story. About the land you're walking, the first sign introduces a traveler from the past. The next describes a problem they faced right on this curve, a rock slide maybe. And that story point ties to the actual geology of the slope beside you. Later, the tale mentions finding a hidden spring, which leads you to a real water source off the trail. This kind of wayfinding does more than guide your steps. It trains you to see cause and effect in the landscape. It builds spatial reasoning. It creates a real connection to the place. You're not a visitor, you're part of an unfolding myth of the terrain. For creators, this is a deep resource. Writers, game designers, they can build worlds with real depth using this frame. In a fantasy novel or a game, the map shouldn't just be decoration. Every mountain, every forest, every river should have a story that explains it, and that story should change how characters deal with that place. A desert isn't just sand, it's the scar from a battle between fire and earth gods. That means certain minerals are there, which draws a specific mining culture. Which leads to political conflict. The myth makes the geography, which shapes the society, which drives the plot. It builds a cohesive world, a breathing one. Where history is written into the land itself, players and readers don't just pass through a location, they peel back its layers. That's the real application. It shows the old navigators were masters of mixed thinking. They brought together astronomy, weather patterns, biology, psychology into one package, the epic. By bringing that whole mindset into our schools, our parks, our stories, we do more than remember the past. We get ready for a complicated future. We learn to see patterns, to connect separate ideas, to remember not just what something is, but what it means. The map becomes a story again, and every journey becomes a way to learn it by heart. This rediscovery comes with a real responsibility. These stories we're trying to decode, they aren't just inert puzzles. They're living traditions. Often they're sacred cultural property held by descendant communities. To treat them as data sets for extraction, as academic curiosities for outsiders to solve, that repeats a harmful pattern. Colonial history is full of that. Cultural treasures taken, translated without context, stripped of spiritual meaning for external study. We have to be vigilant not to perpetuate that. This work needs a different approach, one built on ethical engagement, on deep respect. The core principle is collaboration, not extraction. That means seeking out the cultural custodians, the elders, the knowledge keepers for whom these stories are a living breath. It means listening first, prioritizing their interpretations, their goals for their own heritage. The question shifts. It's no longer just what can we learn from this story. It becomes how can we support the community in preserving and sharing it on their own terms. Sometimes the most respectful act is to step back, to recognize that certain knowledge is esoteric, meant only for initiated members, not for full translation into a Western scientific paper. The map isn't always meant to be published. Sometimes it's meant only to guide the people who belong to the land it describes. This ethical lens changes the work itself. It moves from a solitary decipherment to a shared dialogue. Projects that succeed often involve long-term partnerships, where indigenous navigators co-design the research. Where the revival of a star chant or a ceremonial dance is the primary goal, and any academic insight is a secondary benefit, it acknowledges that the deepest understanding of a mythic map might not come from satellite imagery or software. It might come from the feeling of the wind on your face as you sing the song of your ancestors on the open sea. The scientific framework and the spiritual framework have to sit together. Neither claiming supremacy, responsible exploration honors the story as a continuous thread. It sees these narratives not as artifacts to be placed under glass, but as active, evolving guides. Their power lies in their connection to identity, to language, to a specific relationship with place, to extract the navigational data while ignoring the spiritual context that creates a hollow shell. A useful but soulless tool, it misses the entire point. The map was never just about getting from here to there. It was about knowing why the journey mattered. And who you were when you arrived. This careful, respectful path forward, it ensures that the revival of these ancient systems brings healing, not harm. Connecting us more deeply to the wisdom of the past and to the diverse voices of the present. We all have this need to map things out, to tell the story of a place. It's a human thing. We don't just go from point A to point B. We make a story out of it. A list of turns becomes the story of your day. A vacation isn't coordinates. It's the story of getting lost and finding a cafe. That's not just culture, it's how the brain works. Our minds take the chaos of the world and give it a plot. A beginning, a middle, an end. A map does that. It takes a confusing landscape and gives it order. It creates a plot for the land, drawing a line on a cave wall to the watering hole. Telling a story about the spirit guarding that path. They come from the same place. Both turn the unknown into the known, make the wilderness something you can understand. Create a memory you can pass on. This blend of journey and story is everywhere. In Australia, the Aboriginal dreaming, the whole continent is covered with tracks of ancestral beings. They're not just spiritual paths, they're maps, legal maps, ethical maps, practical maps. The song of the rainbow serpent isn't just a creation myth. It tells you where the water is, where the tribal boundaries are, how to live there. The ancestors' journey and the law of the land are the same thing. Then there's ancient Rome, the cult of the crossroads, minor gods, the lairs, protected travelers. They put shrines at intersections. You'd make an offering before a trip. Then another when you got back safe. The road and the ritual story were fused. The road became a narrative of protection. Every milestone was a plot point. Part of your own story of asking and giving thanks. You see this pattern over and over. The Inca had sec lines, invisible spiritual pathways fanning out from Cusco. They connected temples, springs, mountains. A pilgrim walking a sec line was walking a story about cosmic order and their place in it. In West Africa, griots. They kept history through epic poetry, not dry lists, vibrant musical maps, maps of political alliances, family trees, movements of people across the land. To know the story was to know the landscape. This shared heritage connects us. It shows that long before satellites, we used the best tool we had, the human capacity for story. We built sagas, and by doing that, we didn't just find our way. We found meaning in the journey. We answered a deeper question, not just where am I, but why am I here? And what this path means, space is the next wilderness, and it's waiting for its stories. We're getting ready to send people to Mars, to go farther than we ever have. These trips will be the longest, the most isolated journeys we've ever made. They're going to test human psychology in ways we're just starting to see. That old connection between finding your way and telling your story, it won't just be relevant, it'll be essential. Astronauts flying through the dark for months, they'll probably create their own space lore. New rituals, shared ways of thinking, personal stories to make sense of a place that has none of the usual sights or sounds. none of the cues we've always had. We're already planting the first seeds of that mythology. With the names we're giving to places on Mars, we're not using dry coordinates, we're pulling from ancient myth. From science fiction, Olympus Mons, that's the biggest volcano in the solar system. We named it for the home of the Greek gods, Valles Marineris. It's a canyon system so huge it makes the Grand Canyon look small. Named for the Mariner spacecraft that found it, these aren't random labels, they're the start of a narrative map, turning an alien geography into a place with character. A place with a history we can start to relate to. If we look back at how cultures used stories to handle the unknown on Earth, we can design tools for this new frontier. We can build psychological resilience through shared narrative. A Mars mission could have its own epic structure, its own symbolic milestones, the moment Earth shrinks to a pale blue star in the rear window. That could be a ceremonial threshold, a story point every crew member knows, the true start of the Odyssey, the long cruise phase. It doesn't have to be empty waiting. It could be framed as transformation, a time to learn the ship's new rhythms, to bond as a crew, to prepare. That kind of framing provides orientation. It gives meaning to the monotony. Then, when they finally see Mars, a rust-colored disk growing in the viewport, it won't just be a destination, it'll be the culmination of their story's second act. The trials of landing, of building a base that becomes the final ordeal, the heroic task of making a home in an ancient, silent world. Using story like this, it's more than morale. It's a wayfinding system for the human spirit. It gives a shared language for fear, for hope, for isolation. It creates common reference points for an experience no one on Earth can fully understand. The stories they tell each other, the jokes, the names they give to strange rocks, the traditions they invent for holidays spent millions of miles from home. All of it will weave a new mythology, a mythology of survival and discovery in the cosmos. Our drive to explore has always gone together with our need to narrate. As we reach for the stars, we'll take this tool with us, not as a relic but as vital equipment. The oldest maps, the ones written in epic and song, they're showing us how to read the newest ones. They remind us to find our way in any wilderness, we first have to learn to tell its story. Start with a local map, find one natural feature that stands out. A single hill maybe, or a bend in the river, an odd rock formation. Look at its name, the modern name, then look for the oldest name you can find. That old name is rarely an accident. It's usually a summary, a condensed story, a story with a purpose. A hill called Devil's Backbone that likely describes a sharp ridge, a treacherous one. A creek named Whispering Run that might hint at a specific sound, the sound it makes over stones, a sound that could guide you in fog. The name is a chapter title. A chapter in your area's survival manual. Then search for the legends. Is there an old tale, a witch who lived there, a ghost that haunts that bend, a giant who threw the rock? Don't dismiss it as superstition. Ask the functional question, what practical reality is this story preserving? A tale about a witch in the woods, that could be a warning. A warning to children about a swampy area, bad air there, or poisonous plants. A ghost story about a bridge that might mark a site of frequent flash floods. A giant's rock, that could be a glacial erratic, a massive stone foreign to the local geology. It needed an explanation, and it served as a meeting point. An unmistakable one. Then visit the place, go with the story in your mind. Walk it as an act of detection, archaeological detection. If the legend speaks of a lady in the lake, stand by that water. Observe, is it exceptionally clear, a reliable spring in a dry region? The story may have encoded its value, ensured it was treated as sacred, kept clean. If the feature is called slippery ridge, feel the rock underfoot. Is the stone particularly smooth, shale-like, making ascent hazardous in wet weather? The story was the caution sign. This exercise does something. It re-enchants your local environment. That hill you drive past every day, it's no longer just a hill. It's a data point, a monument to generations of human observation. Your simple walk becomes a conversation with those who came before. You learn to read the landscape, not just with your eyes, but through the accumulated wisdom of stories. You start to see the layers, the geological layer, the ecological layer, and now the narrative layer, the human interpretation, the one that turned raw geography into a guide for living. You connect to the deep map, the one that exists just beneath the surface, beneath every place we call home. Our digital maps are fragile. A corrupted file, a dead battery, a service gets shut down, and the knowledge is just gone. But the story of Maui fishing up islands, or Odysseus sailing between Scylla and Charybdis, those have lasted thousands of years. They traveled without a server farm. Just human memory and voice, and that endurance shows you something. These old stories were anti-fragile. They didn't just survive disruption, they were strengthened by it. Every time someone told the story again, it was a stress test. If a detail was confusing or didn't matter to a new audience, it got changed or dropped. The core truth, the wayfinding part, that stayed, but the shell of the story evolved for new ears, and that's the opposite of our digital systems. A software update can make a file unreadable. One point of failure can erase a whole database, but a myth living in a community has countless backup copies. Each one is slightly different. Each one is resilient. The secret is in the structure. They weren't cold lists of facts. They were emotional journeys. They tied survival data to fear, to hope, to wonder. You don't forget the terror of Grendel's attacks because the story makes you feel the vulnerability of that hall. You remember the whirlpool because you're invested in Odysseus's struggle. The information is wrapped in human experience, and that emotional coding is a powerful preservative. It makes the knowledge sticky, worth retelling around a fire, worth passing to a child. Our modern data streams don't have that stickiness. A GPS coordinate is forgotten once you arrive. But the legend of how your people found a valley, that's remembered for generations. So the lesson isn't to throw away our phones, it's to ask a question. How do we hybridize this old wisdom with our modern tools? How do we build long-term knowledge systems that are as robust as the old myths? The answer might be in the narratives we're already making. Films, video games, immersive experiences, these are the epic poems now. They have the same power to shape imagination, to embed ideas deep in cultural memory. What if we designed some of these to carry essential wisdom, not as a dry announcement, but as a compelling part of the story itself? Imagine a video game where the gameplay teaches ecological stewardship. Where to progress, you have to learn to read environmental signs, virtual versions of bird migrations or star paths. The knowledge becomes a tool for victory. Locked in through action, or a film franchise that, inside its adventure, encodes a real culture's relationship with the land, preserving that perspective. Or an augmented reality experience in a park that layers local history over the landscape, turning a walk into an interactive saga of that place. These are modern vessels. They can be designed for persistence, for adaptation, for emotional resonance. They can carry forward the crucial maps not just of geography, but of values, of ethics, of memory, into an uncertain future. The goal is to make sure the most important things we know are never just a click away, but are woven into the very stories we tell about who we are. The real genius wasn't in any one piece, it was in how they were woven together. Ancient wayfinding wasn't just separate tools, it wasn't a star chart here and a story over there. It was an integrated model, a complete operating system for moving through the world. You could think of it as a framework with 5 layers, each one reinforcing the others, creating something much stronger than just the parts alone. At the base was the celestial mythology, the sky map that gave you the fixed coordinates, the grand clockwork of the seasons and the directions. Everything else was pinned to that. Then above that came the oceanic and terrestrial epics, the environmental manuals. These translated the silent language of the waves, the winds, the birds, the plants into narrative. They taught you to read the living text of the sea and the forest. The third layer was the mythical landmarks, the hazard database. This turned dangers and resources into memorable characters. Dragons for fishers, sirens for treacherous shores, healing springs guarded by spirits. It encoded safety protocols into stories you couldn't forget. Then came the fourth layer, which was crucial, the hero's journey, the psychological algorithm. This wasn't about geography. It was about the mind of the traveler. It provided a script for the inner voyage, the call, the trials, the helpers, the return. It normalized fear and hardship, framing them as necessary steps in a destined story. That kept morale alive when the body was exhausted. And finally, binding it all together was ritual, the embodied practice, the dances, the chants, the physical performances. That moved the knowledge from the mind into muscle and bone. It made the map a lived experience, a communal act. So this model treated information as holistic. Interconnected, the position of a star wasn't just an astronomy fact. It was a character in a story which pointed to a season, which signaled a bird's migration, which was celebrated in a dance step. Every piece of data was tied to every other piece, wrapped in narrative and reinforced by community practice. The traveler using this system wasn't just following directions. They were living a myth. They were participating in a cycle that actively connected the past, the present, and the very landscape under their feet. Their journey was a verse in an ongoing epic, adding to the story even as they followed it. That fostered a profound sense of place and purpose. You weren't a tourist passing through scenery. You were a character fulfilling a role in a story that the land itself was telling. Your survival proved the story true, and the story, in turn, ensured your survival. It was a closed loop of meaning. Now compare that to our modern navigation. We have stunningly accurate tools, but they are fragmented. The GPS gives you a line, the weather app gives you a forecast, the guidebook offers historical trivia. They exist in separate silos on separate screens. They demand nothing of our full awareness. They don't ask us to weave the stars, the smell of the pines, and the old tale about the river into a single, coherent understanding. What we are rediscovering, then, isn't a set of quaint old tricks. It's a form of holistic intelligence, an intelligence that didn't separate knowledge into categories like science, art, history, and spirituality. It fused them into a single, powerful tool for being human in a vast world. We are only beginning to appreciate the depth of that integration and what its absence might have cost us. Mythology was the first atlas we ever had, but it wasn't drawn on paper. It was made of memory and metaphor. These old stories, they weren't just for entertainment. They were a kind of technology, a cognitive system. It let people explore. It helped them survive. It connected human consciousness directly to the natural world. In ancient Greece, they used the stars as a chart. Polynesian navigators, they had chants to read the waves. Our ancestors moved through a world that was one long story. Every mountain had a character. Every ocean current had a plot. Every star had a role to play in an epic, and that epic guided their steps. These narrative maps, they did more than show the way. They created a relationship with a place, a deep one. A traveler wasn't just an observer. They weren't just passing through scenery. They were a character. They had a role in the land's own ongoing saga. Their survival proved the story was true, and the story, it showed them how to survive. It was a closed loop. A deep integration of knowledge, identity, and environment. Our modern tools, they often struggle to replicate that. Looking ahead now to an uncertain future, This lost wisdom, it offers us more than just historical insight. It gives us a blueprint, a way to re-establish a meaningful relationship, an observant one, a storied relationship with our planet and with each other. It reminds us that true wayfinding is holistic. It requires listening to the world with all our senses, seeing data in the flight of a bird, finding meaning in the name of a hill. The oldest maps are the ones we carry inside us, in our capacity for wonder. The greatest treasure from these ancient voyages is a simple truth: we are navigators. We always have been navigators of space and story. Our journey is never just about the destination. It's about the tale we tell of the path and how that story, in turn, shapes who we become.